Well, we begin tonight's show with the violent scenes in Melbourne today as far-left protest groups clashed with police, leaving 2 officers injured. Officers made multiple arrests and were forced to use capsicum spray to ward off the protesters. The chaos erupted as counter-protesters turned up to a planned demonstration against mass immigration, while similar protests in Sydney and Brisbane went off without a hitch. In Melbourne, 2 officers had to be taken to hospital, one of them with a suspected broken hand. Police Commander Wayne Cheeseman was clearly at his wits' end with the conduct of protesters.
This is what was thrown at police today, and I think Melbourne has had a gutful. I look on the social media streaming platforms of some of these issue-motivated groups that are saying police used excessive force. The fact was, these were being thrown at police. Bottles filled with shards of glass were being thrown at the police. Rotten fruit was being thrown at police. Bins were put on fire. Flags were on fire. And I think, really enough's enough.
But what's especially worth noting here is there was no attempt this time by police to draw any equivalence with the protesters from the far left and those on the right. Instead, they made clear there was one side who was causing the trouble.
People came to pick a fight with the police. The people that came to pick the fight with police were the issue-motivated groups on the left. I can tell you that the March for Australia group, they were peaceful, they were engaging, they listened to our instructions, they did what they were told, and they protested by example.
It comes as the state government doubled down, labelling the CBD as safe. Joe, I don't think anyone clearly believes that anymore when it comes to Melbourne.
No, I don't think it does. I did a comparison between Melbourne and Sydney crime stats just a couple of weeks ago, and I was even though it was done on the basis that Melbourne was an absolute basket case, and even so, I kept trying to find stuff that surely there's an exception here. Surely it can't actually be as bad as all that. Surely it can't be. And the truth is, with things like home invasions, car theft, carjacking, which is even more terrifying, on every single marker, Melbourne's crime rate is screaming up the charts exponentially, while elsewhere in New South Wales, by both numbers and percentages, it is far, far, far lower. And also in Melbourne, of course, what you've got is an extreme radical left. It is everywhere. It is someone from the sort of centre or centre left,
Melbourne,
whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
But it's called Melbourne, and I know exactly the sort of people that this guy is talking about. They are people who, I've been a marshal when I was a student socialist, been a marshal on protests where there were clearly, I had to pull one of them back, a guy who just wanted to basically tackle a cop who was trying to keep the march safe. There are extremist
and that's
elements.
what the police commander was saying, exactly that, Holly, that these people were coming out to pick fights with police. That was their intention. And I think there's an irony that many of these groups, people within these groups, call themselves anti-racists, anti-fascists. They're the ones acting like violent thugs, though.
And would declare themselves as some sort of peaceful protest and demand the right to do so. And it is clearly obvious. That was incredibly moving watching that police officer. You could hear the emotion in his voice, and you can only imagine. I feel my heart breaks for Victorians because I don't even know how people are staying there anymore. After we saw the stabbing it didn't happen last week. It was when they finally acknowledged that it had happened, the woman just walking down the street.
And we'll talk about that in a bit. And we'll talk more about those statistics.
This is out of control, though. And the fact, this is the new protest du jour. These people clearly do not have enough to do with themselves because it doesn't matter whether it's pro-Palestinian causes or, now they're picking the fights with the anti-mass immigration groups. These guys just need a hobby other than protesting because it's out of control. And the fact that they were throwing stones that size, bottles at police officers. But you know what? They'll be pulled in by the police, put in front of a magistrate who'll give them all bail straight away.
Well, that is one of the huge issues, and I want to get into that more in a minute when we talk about the case that you mentioned with that stabbing. But Evelyn, as a former member of the police, You know better than anyone else on this panel what it is like to have to operate in those sorts of situations. I mean, watching that strong language from the commander there, it's clear that many police in Victoria are at the end of their tether, and no surprise.
Yeah, like good on him for being so bold about it, because for a long time we've known what the problem is, and for a long time there have been, blanket statements made about violent acts because people don't want to offend certain groups of people. But the elephant in the room is that more and more these days, the radical left are increasingly violent, because you only have to look at the protests to see when they're successful, when they follow police directions, and then when something like this happens. And it seems to be more times than not, it is from the radical left. So good on this particular police officer for getting out there and actually hitting you straight between the eyes with the truth. And in doing so, not only does it make people who have been peacefully protesting feel like they're, vindicated of the stigma attached to them, it also will embolden police officers to speak out more truthfully about what they're seeing on the ground with their own eyes and with their own experiences. Because for this particular police officer to say that, there must be a lot more going on than even we're aware of, because he would be under the microscope, people would be watching him even above his pay grade, and for him to come out and be bold like that, it's far worse than I think we even realise. But it's a really good step in the right direction to bringing the truth to the forefront, because these radical leftists need to be put back in their place. Like you said, not only do they need a hobby, most of them need to actually be brought before the courts for the crimes that we actually do have available at our fingertips, so that this doesn't happen in the future.
I mean, Darren, I noticed at that protest a lot of still Palestinian flags, a lot of kafirs. I mean, there's a ceasefire at the moment, but I think a lot of the time with these far left groups, and I say far left, I mean, you and Joe are
We're
on
left,
the
but
left.
not far left.
But you're not far left. So that's why I make that clarification here, that it is the hard left at these protests. I'm not saying that everyone on the right and far right is, of course, perfect, but in this instance, very much, and in many protests, the problem does seem to be coming from that end of the spectrum.
Well, certainly in this instance, the right protesters, they had a permit, they had a route, they liaised with police, they knew where they were going, they did what they were told, everyone's happy. The counter protesters were there to cause trouble. And so that's exactly their motivation, and that's exactly what they did. So part of that, if police try to say, don't go down this road because it's going to cause a confrontation, they clearly ignored all of that advice. They wanted, to make their point, but they wanted to punch on with the coppers, and they got it. And can I just say very quickly that I've got 3 cousins who are coppers in Victoria, and one of them is sort of on the desk at a fairly hot part of Melbourne in the outer north. The bail laws, it's a real problem. That people can do something and 24 hours later they'll do the same crime again. And they'll have been allowed out on bail, and whether it's a home invasion, whether it's a car theft, whether it's some sort of knife incident, something needs to change. It's not just because people feel unsafe, and police, not just the fellow who we saw on air before, police are not happy that it's not working.
Well, we've already seen this exodus of officers from Victoria to places like Queensland, because clearly they've had enough of, as you say, arresting people, doing their jobs, and then a magistrate lets them out on bail, so they have to catch them again the following week.
And the kid who, a friend of a friend, someone broke into their house, he caught them, it was on TV, caught the 15-year-old offender, who then, coming out of court less than 24 hours later, said, I'm going to go and stab him. That's not on. There needs to be a better way, and it needs to change quickly.
And I think you're seeing the police as well, with the new commissioner actually speaking out about the situation, and effectively speaking out against the government, contradicting the government on the fact that, oh no, there is no problem here, everything's fine, look at these statistics over here, it's just a beat up, blah, blah, blah. You had the cops going, actually, no, it's a real crisis. And when a police force is basically openly, publicly contradicting its own civilian government, that's when you know that cops are really on the edge.
But it's just amazing to me that Jacinta Allen remains so pig-headed and refusing to see what is happening or admit what's happening. There's just nothing to see here.